Hello, my dear friends. I hope you all are keeping well. Well, like many of you, I'm in home isolation. But the process of learning must never come to a grinding halt. This is the reason I have decided to do this video. And in this video, I'm going to take up the first lesson in your book, A Piece of Bread by Francois Coppe. Francois Coppe was a well-known French novelist and poet. Since the story is set in France, the names of the characters in the book and the names of places are in French, and it's very difficult to pronounce the French names. I'm not familiar with the French language, so let me admit at the very outset that I may make mistakes while pronouncing the names. Please do bear with me. Now you need to know the background against which the story is set. As I've already mentioned, it is set in France, but it is set against the background of Franco-Prussian War that happened in the late 19th century. During that time, France was under attack by the Prussian army. Please remember, Prussia was a part of Germany at that time. So against this background, the story is set. There are two protagonists in the story. One is a duke and the other is a common soldier. I'm sure you know the meaning of the word duke. A duke is a member of the aristocracy, which means he is at the top of the social hierarchy. Whereas the other character, he is from a very poor background and he is at the bottom rung of the social order. Now, let me introduce the name of the Duke. The name of the Duke was Henry de Hardimont. Now, when the story opens, we find Henry de Hardimont in a place called Savoy. Have you heard of the name Savoy? Well, it's a very popular tourist hotspot in France, which has borders with Switzerland and Italy. So while he was in Savoy, he read in the newspaper that France had been defeated on its soil by the Prussian army. Now, Henry de Hardimont, he was a patriot. He felt enraged when he learned that his country had suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of the invading army. So what he did, he ordered his valet to pack his suitcase. Now, do you know the meaning of the word valet? A valet is a man's personal attendant. So he asked his valet to pack his suitcase, and then he left for Paris in an express train. He was in a tearing hurry to come back to Paris. I'm sure you all know that Paris is the capital of France. Why did he return to Paris in such a tearing hurry? This is because he wanted to join the army and fight for the honor and dignity of his motherland. So on his arrival in Paris, what he did was he joined the army. Now, Henry de Hardimont was a part of a regiment that was in charge of Canon Fort Beatrice. It was a very, very important fort just on the outskirts of France, just on the outskirts of Paris. It had strategic importance. So he was part of that regiment, and the regiment was staying in a tavern. Now, do you know the meaning of the word tavern? A tavern means a place where people get together for a drink, like a pub. It can also mean an inn or a hotel. So the regiment was staying in the tavern. Now let me describe the tavern for you. The tavern was across a slushy field which was deeply rutted, and then there was a road that cut across the field. The road was lined with shrubs. The tavern was a very, very dreary, dismal, and a gloomy place. The tavern had borne the scars of the battle. Part of the roof had been blown away by a shell, and the walls of the tavern was spattered with blood. Now, Duke de Hardimont, he was standing at the door of the tavern, and he was lost in deep thought. It was winter. As you know, France is terribly cold during the winter season. In addition to that, the sky was overcast. There were heavy clouds in the sky, and it looked ominous. Duke de Hardimont, he felt depressed. He was shivering, though he was wearing a sheepskin coat. He was perhaps contemplating the life that he was living before joining the army. He was thinking of the comfort and luxury that he enjoyed before he joined the army. The life of a soldier is a very hard one. So as he was contemplating his civilian life, suddenly he felt hungry. So what he did, he took out a huge chunk of bread from his knapsack. I'm sure you know the meaning of the word knapsack. It means a bag with straps which you can carry on your shoulders. And then he bit off a huge chunk of that bread and he started chewing it slowly. But then after some time, the bread tasted hard and bitter. It tasted so bad that he decided to throw it away into the mud. The moment he threw it into the mud, he was amazed to see that a member of the regiment, a fellow soldier who was standing nearby, he bent down and picked up that piece of bread, rubbed it on his sleeve, and began to eat it hungrily. The Duke felt ashamed. This is because the bread, which was so distasteful to him, was so desirable to a fellow soldier. He felt pity for that soldier. Now, let me describe the soldier here. He was a young man about the same age as the Duke. He was a tall, large man, but he was very, very thin. He looked famished. He was malnourished, and then he had a beard on his face, and he looked sickly. The Duke, since he felt pity for the fellow soldier, began to talk to the man. He introduced himself as Hardimont. He didn't mention his title. He deliberately left out his title, the title of Duke. This is because he knew that the moment he would mention the word Duke, a wall would come up between him and the soldier, and he would not be able to get close to the soldier. The soldier introduced himself as Ja Victor. The Duke told Ja Victor that he was really sorry that he had thrown away the bread. If he had known that he was hungry, he would have gladly shared it with him. But the soldier just shrugged it off, saying that he was used to this kind of life. And then he mentioned that he had just been discharged from the hospital, that he had suffered some injuries during the battle, and then he was admitted to hospital. But since his injuries were not very serious, he was discharged. And then he said that at the hospital, he was given a horse meat soup. But now that he was back with the regiment, he would have to face the pangs of hunger once again. The Duke felt sorry for the man. He was deeply moved. And then what he did, he shared some brandy with the man. This is how, they got to know each other. After they shared some brandy with each other, they decided to go for a walk. As they started walking along the road, Ja Victor decided to open up about his life. He started sharing the details of the kind of life that he had lived before he joined the army. And it was a deeply moving story, a soul-stirring story. He said that he was a foundling. Now, do you know the meaning of the word foundling? Foundling means a child abandoned by its parents. So, he was an orphan and he grew up in an asylum. Now, here, in the context of the story, an asylum means an orphanage or a shelter home. And the orphanage was run by Catholic sisters. According to Ja Victor, he had a kind of happy childhood because he grew up in the orphanage where he was taken care of by one particular sister who was very, very fond of him. So he had very fond memories of the asylum. But then, after some time, the Catholic nun who was taking care of him, she died of a lung trouble. And then when he was about 12 years of age, he had to leave the asylum. And then he was apprenticed to a chairmander. A chairmander is a carpenter. And you know who an apprentice is? An apprentice is a person who tries to learn a trade from an expert. So, he became an apprentice to a chairmander. But unfortunately, his master and his wife, both of them were very cruel and they were miserly, very stingy and tight-fisted. They made him work hard but did not give him enough to eat. Quite often he had to go to bed hungry. He stayed with the chairmander for about 3 years, and thereafter, he was on his own. He did a number of odd jobs. He served as a mason, a floor polisher, a shop assistant. So he did different things in order to stay alive. And during those years, hunger was his constant companion. He was always stalked by the fear of hunger. Quite often he had to forage for food on the street, on the pavement. He would pick up pieces of bread or food from the sidewalk. So he's used to this kind of life. That was why he didn't feel embarrassed when he picked up the bread in front of the Duke. So he lived a life of hardships. And then when he turned 18, he joined the army. So that in a nutshell was his story, and he shared it with the Duke. The Duke was deeply moved. He was overwhelmed when he heard that story. Out of compassion for his fellow soldier, he told him that if both of them survived the war, then he would try to help him in whatever way he could. He also promised that since his ration of bread was quite generous, he would be sharing it with him. After that, both of them, they returned to the tavern, and since they were very, very tired, they went to sleep. And both of them were fast asleep. The moment they went back to the tavern, they fell asleep. Not around midnight, Ja Victor, he was awakened by the pangs of hunger. And then a little bit of moonshine, a little bit of moonlight was percolating through the gap in the roof, and it was falling on the face of Duke de Hardimont, who was sleeping nearby. Now, Ja Victor, he looked at the handsome blonde face of Henry de Hardimont with admiration. He was grateful to the Duke for the kindness that he had shown him. And at that time, what happened is the sergeant of the platoon. Now, the meaning of the word sergeant is a non-commissioned officer. A non-commissioned officer means an officer who has risen through the ranks through promotion, not appointed as an officer directly. So, the sergeant came in looking for 5 soldiers who were supposed to do the duty of sentinels at midnight. You know what is the job of a sentinel? He does the job of a sentry. He has to be watchful and look out for the enemy. Now, it was Duke de Hardimont who was supposed to be among those 5 soldiers, but he was fast asleep. So what did Ja Victor do? He offered to go in place of Duke de Hardimont. He told his officer, "Excuse me, sir, since my friend Hardimont is sleeping, can I take his place?" The sergeant agreed. So Duke de Hardimont is slept on, whereas Ja Victor, he went to do his duty. After they had left, the soldiers who were sleeping, they were awakened by the sound of gunfire. All the soldiers, they sprang to their feet and then picked up their gun. They cautiously stepped outside and looked down the road. At that time, they saw that a soldier was running towards them. And then the soldier stopped near them, out of breath. Since he was running hard, he was breathless. So all the soldiers asked the messenger what the matter was. Then he broke the news that they were under attack from the Prussian soldiers. And then they must fall back, they must beat a retreat. All the soldiers asked the messenger what had happened to these sentries. He said that, well, all are safe and secure except one. It was Ja Victor. Ja Victor was shot through his head by a bullet, and his death was instantaneous. Can you imagine how Duke the Hardiman felt when he heard that news? He was completely devastated. He learned that when he was asleep, it was Ja Victor who had voluntarily agreed to take his duty. He realized that Ja Victor had made the supreme sacrifice because of him. He realized that he owed his life to Ja Victor. After that, there is a twist in the tale. Next, we see the Duke returning from a club in the wee hours of the morning. That means very early in the morning, at around 2 o'clock, he was returning from the club. Now, this suggests that the war had come to an end, peace had been restored in France, and the Duke had given up his army life and he had returned to his civilian life. So that night, he went to the club. Probably he gambled there and lost around 100 louis. Now, do you know what louis is? Well, it is a gold coin which was used as currency in France before the French Revolution. Now, you know, the currency of France is euro, since it is a member of European Union. So he had lost around 100 louis, and then he wanted to return home. He was accompanied by a friend. He was a count. He was Count the Solness. I'm sure you know what a count is. A count is also a member of aristocracy, is a nobleman, but below the rank of duke. So the duke and the count, they decided to return home on foot. It was the duke's idea. He told his friend, the count, that he did not want to get into his carriage, that he would like to walk along the road. The count agreed. So they were walking along the deserted road, and as they were walking, suddenly the toe of the Duke's boot touched something. He bent down and then he picked up a dirty piece of bread. And to the amazement of the count, the Duke started rubbing that piece of bread with his handkerchief. The count was bewildered. He didn't understand why the Duke was doing that. He thought that the Duke was out of his mind. So he told the Duke why was he doing that. And he was amused also. Now the Duke, he felt a little offended, and then told his friend that that piece of bread reminded him of a dear friend of his who had laid down his life for him. He narrated that story, how Ja Victor, on that fateful night, had offered to take his duty and how he had made that supreme sacrifice. So that piece of bread is a symbol of the sacrifice that Ja Victor had made. And the Duke treasured the memory of Ja Victor. That memory was very, very precious to him. This is how the story ends. Now, it's a very moving story. I'm sure you'll agree with me. You can see that a friendship can develop very quickly when one person tries to understand the other person on a personal level. When a person shows kindness and empathy, friendship can develop very quickly. And friendship involves sacrifice. But in this case, Ja Victor made the supreme sacrifice. He laid down his life for the sake of the Duke, and the Duke would always remain grateful to Ja Victor. I'm sure you've enjoyed the story, but you need to read the text thoroughly. Only then you will understand everything. Well, I'm going to wrap it up here. If you have any questions, if you need any clarification, you can get in touch with me. But before I call it a wrap, I'd like to remind you that there has been a sudden spike in COVID cases, even in Mokokchung. So you need to be careful, you need to be vigilant. Don't lower your guard. Please mask up, sanitize and wash your hands regularly. And then there is one thing that you need to do. Please avoid a large gathering. So take care of yourself. Bye for now.